What's up, everybody? I'm Conrad Iacobellis, and welcome to whatever this series is. We are shifting our focus from the world of sleep paralysis and paranormal to two unsolved true crime mysteries. Please let me know what you think of these down below, and let's start by going back to 2014. It's been 12 years since the world first heard the name Lars Mittank, and the internet is still no closer to finding the truth of what happened to him. Now, let me start by saying the 28-year-old German was on a week-long trip with his friends in Varna, Bulgaria. They were staying at the Viva Club Hotel in Golden Sands, which was a tourist hotspot known for its beaches and party scene, and this seems like the perfect getaway. But for Lars, he was about to become one of the most famous cases of CCTV footage in history. On July 5th, just one night before Lars and his friends were scheduled to fly home, the trip would take a turn for the worse. You see, after a long day of drinking, Lars' friends decided to head out for a late-night meal, but Lars decided to stay behind, claiming he wasn't hungry and that he would return to the hotel alone later that night. When Lars' friends showed up to the hotel, Lars wasn't there. Now, Lars didn't return to the hotel until the following morning, and while his friends were out eating, it's reported that Lars had crossed paths with a group of rival football fans, or soccer for my American audience, and unfortunately this brief clash was over the rival teams. And this would set off a chain of events that changed everything. Now, this is where the mystery of Lars Mittank's disappearance gets messy. When investigators later questioned Lars' friends after his disappearance, the stories didn't quite line up. Some of the friends claimed he was beaten up directly by the football fans, while others claimed that those football fans actually hired someone or some people to do their dirty work. Now, amidst the conflicting accounts, there is one truth we know. Lars would emerge that night with a badly injured jaw and a ruptured eardrum, and these injuries would ultimately lead to his disappearance. For his injuries, Lars did seek out medical attention, where a local doctor prescribed him 500 milligrams of cefprozil, which is a strong antibiotic meant to ward off infection. But this diagnosis came with a heavy cost. Because of the ruptured eardrum, the doctor warned Lars that the pressure of the flight could cause permanent damage or worse to him. So he was grounded. Now, while the doctor reportedly urged Lars to check into a hospital for further observation, Lars refused, choosing instead to stay behind alone while his friends would fly back. One of Lars' friends did actually offer to stay behind with him in Varna, but Lars insisted he was fine and turned them down. One of the friends later recounted to German television that Lars seemed relaxed and in a good mood when they said their goodbyes. And this is a detail that remains haunting, considering this would be the last time any of them would see Lars ever again. Now, Lars' plans were in shambles. He had to look for a place to stay elsewhere in Varna, and he would end up miles away from the beaches of Golden Sands and checked into a budget establishment called Hotel Color. And it was here on July 7th, just 2 days after the fight, that the relaxed version of Lars that the friends saw for a last time was replaced by a man consumed by sudden, inexplicable paranoia. The paranoia that began at the Hotel Color soon manifested into chilling phone calls with his mother. Lars reportedly whispered into the receiver, terrified that someone was listening to him. He told Sandra, his mom, that he was in danger, and he was convinced that people were following him with the intent to kill or rob him. During these manic calls, he brought up his medication, asking specifically about one of the ingredients in the cefprozil he'd been prescribed. Between the strange atmosphere of the hotel and his mounting fear, it was becoming clear that Lars believed he was being targeted by someone. Lars was actually captured on CCTV footage from inside the hotel, and it showed a disturbing look into Lars's final hours. He appeared highly agitated, darting through hallways and hiding in elevators as if he was being hunted. He is seen reportedly checking windows, clearly on the lookout for a threat. And despite Lars's extreme tactical movements and obvious fear, the cameras never picked up anyone chasing him. There was no one in the halls, no one in the elevators, and no one waiting for him in the lobby. Was someone after Lars, or was it just paranoia? On the morning of July 8th, 3 days after the fight, Lars arrived at Varna Airport. and everything seems fine until he stepped into the office of an airport physician. Though this physician cleared him for travel, Lars looked nervous and asked him questions about the medication he was on. The breaking point came suddenly when a construction worker walked into the room and Lars was seized by a final wave of terror. He reportedly mumbled, "I don't want to die here. I have to get out of here," before bolting from his chair. Lars Mittank sprinted out of the terminal, fleeing out the front doors, and disappeared into the distance. This is the last footage of the 28-year-old. Since Lars may have been dealing with a psychosis episode, let's understand what may have been happening inside his mind. And we have to take a little bit of a look into what even psychosis is. It's a psychotic condition that often emerges in men during their late teens and early 20s and can actually show up in men's late 20s. Psychosis isn't just schizophrenia. That's the most common form of psychosis I think people know, but rather it's just a collection of symptoms where a person loses touch with reality. And in those final moments at the airport, it looks like Lars has lost touch with reality. Lars's family has gone on to say that they don't have a history of mental illness. So if Lars didn't have a mental illness that was going to trigger in his late 20s, let's take a look at external factors that may push someone towards a psychotic break. Now, a psychotic break can trigger without warning or obvious history, and unfortunately, extreme stress to a physical injury to even a reaction to medication may cause it to happen. And Lars was facing all three of these. But I want to focus on one thing specifically. You see, Lars was always concerned about the 500 milligrams of cefprozil he was on. So we have to ask ourselves, can an antibiotic actually trigger psychosis? Studies have shown that, psychosis can actually be an adverse drug reaction in antibiotics. You see, cefprozil is a cephalosporin antibiotic and has been shown to have a higher prevalence of psychosis than the usual range of 0.3% to 3.8%. So the cefprozil Lars was taking may legitimately be the reason why he had a psychotic break. He may have just had a bad reaction to the medication. There's another theory that suggests that Lars simply walked away to start a new life in the Bulgarian countryside. This theory as to what happened with Lars says his paranoia was all an act and that he simply wanted to be left alone for the rest of his life. But this kind of falls apart when you look at the life that he left behind. He had a career he enjoyed, a loving partner, and a family that he was deeply connected with. Simply to say, there was no reason for him to vanish into thin air. A far darker theory, though, suggests that he didn't choose to leave. He was forced into criminal activity. This hypothesis points back to those missing hours on the night of July 5th. This theory states that when Lars disappeared while his friends were out eating, he may have crossed paths with a Bulgarian or Russian syndicate that targeted him to act as a drug mule. They forced him to ingest or even carry illicit substances back to Germany, and that his panic behavior was a reaction to the sheer terror of the situation. As I said, it's almost been 12 years since the disappearance of Lars Mittank, and unfortunately, it seems this is never going to get solved. The case has kind of gone cold. There's been no evidence. No one has seen him. There's been some instances here or there, but no one has ever found Lars Mittank. And this is a mystery that will go unsolved. Our next unsolved mystery takes us back to the late 1980s to Vancouver, British Columbia. Cindy Hack was born on June 12, 1944 to parents Otto, a retired Canadian Air Force colonel, and Tilly Hack, a housewife. In July 1966, 22 years after her birth, Cindy graduated from nursing school and married psychiatrist Roy Makepeace. Yes, that is his actual name. His name is Roy Makepeace. That's like going to a mechanic named Mike Fix Things. By the mid-1970s, Cindy had found her calling at Blenheim House as a coordinator for young children with emotional struggles before eventually transitioning to Richmond General Hospital. Cindy was a successful professional dedicated to helping others find peace. This is ironic because Cindy, however, was about to enter a nightmare of her own. This period marked the end of her quiet life and the beginning of a turn for the worse that would eventually become one of Canada's most baffling unsolved mysteries. Following her separation from Roy in the summer of 1982, Cindy James became the target of a relentless campaign of harassment. Beginning that October, An unidentified caller began plaguing her with random phone calls, alternating between chilling whispers and a heavy silence. It was the beginning of what would be a 7-year ordeal that would include a staggering 100 reported harassing calls. Tilly Hack, Cindy's mother, said Cindy told her she didn't recognize the voice at all. She said it was just a voice. Sometimes it would change, the sound would change, and sometimes it was just a whispering. Sometimes it was just nothing, just silence. The 3-month period from October 1982 to January 1983 saw a rapid and terrifying escalation. Cindy reported a constant presence of prowlers, but the evidence became increasingly physical. On her doorstep, she found notes constructed in that classic ransom fashion of letters cut from magazine pages. But the taunts were just the beginning. The intruder began smashing porch lights and cutting phone lines. There was an attack on Cindy's dog, and the person doing all of this even would put 3 dead cats in her yard. It was clear that the situation had moved beyond mere intimidation and creepy phone calls. And unfortunately for Cindy, things were only about to get more violent from here. The first reported physical assault occurred in January 1983. Agnes Woodcock, a close friend of Cindy's, discovered Cindy outside her home in a state of shock with a black nylon stocking tied around her throat. Cindy explained that the attack happened in an instant. She had gone to the garage when someone jumped her from the shadows. Cindy could never identify the attacker. The only thing that she could tell the police was that the person who tried to strangle her was wearing white sneakers. Terrified and desperate, Cindy took drastic measures to erase her old life. Cindy Hack became Cindy James. Along with the name change, she painted her vehicle and relocated, attempting to build a wall between herself and her tormentor. To bolster her security, she brought in private investigator Ozzy Caban. But rather than providing clarity, Caban's presence highlighted the growing holes in her story. Caban would later state that her evasive behavior and tendency to withhold information were massive red flags. In his view, Cindy simply wasn't acting the way a victim was supposed to. She was creating a barrier of skepticism, and the police were already beginning to lean into it. The suspicion surrounding Cindy James went beyond the police, as her own parents felt she was also hiding something. There actually was a reason why Cindy was being so secretive. Tilly Hack later shared a chilling detail her daughter had finally confessed. The caller weaponized Cindy's family against her. As Tilly recounted, her daughter had been held at knife point and told, "If you talk, your sister will be next, and then your mother. So just keep quiet." This threat put Cindy in a bind. The more Cindy tried to protect her family by staying silent, the more the authorities viewed her as a suspect. On January 30th, 1984, the harassment escalated into a scene straight out of a horror film. After hearing strange sounds on their shared radio, Ozzy Caban would arrive at Cindy's house to find the doors locked and his client unresponsive on the floor. The scene was a stage with a brutal message. There was a knife that had been used to pin a note through Cindy's own hand. When emergency services arrived and Cindy began to revive, she provided a fragmented account of the attack. She told Caban she had spotted a man entering her property before being struck with a blunt object. Her final memory before losing consciousness was the sensation of being held down and injected with an unknown substance. On December 11th, 1985, Cindy was discovered semi-conscious in a ditch, a staggering 6 miles from her house. She was suffering from hypothermia in the freezing cold, yet she was dressed in nothing but a single man's work boot and a glove. Around her neck was the familiar signature of a black nylon stocking and a fresh needle mark in her arm. Just like the other attacks, Cindy's memory of the transit from her home to that ditch was a total blank. In a desperate bid for safety, she moved in with friends Agnes and Tom Woodcock, but Cindy would soon learn that a change of address was no protection against her attacker. One night, the silence was shattered when Cindy came racing to their door. She was shouting that she heard a noise downstairs. Tom Woodcock had heard it too. It was a heavy metallic thump that shook the floorboards. When they rushed in to investigate, they found that the basement was engulfed in flames. The situation turned into a familiar situation when Agnes reached for the phone, only to find that the phone lines had been severed. While Tom scrambled outside to find a neighbor who could help them, he spotted a man standing on the curb, watching the house. When Tom called out to him, the stranger turned and vanished into the night. It was a rare sighting of a potential suspect, but the police didn't just see it that way. Reporter Neil Hall highlighted some anomalies that fueled skepticism the night of the fire. He noted that despite Cindy's claim of an intruder, the window through which they supposedly entered was not disturbed at all. There were no signs of anyone breaking into the basement, which led investigators to believe that the fire had to be set from inside the house. Investigators were also dubious of Cindy's actions that night. You see, Cindy noticed the house was on fire because she was out at 3 a.m. walking her dog and spotted the flames at that time. Hall famously questioned the logic of why a woman under constant attacks would choose to walk her dog alone at 3 a.m. In the eyes of the police, these weren't just odd choices. They were signs of a staged performance. It was a line of reasoning that effectively turned Cindy into a suspect. On May 25th, 1989, 6 years and 7 months after the first threatening phone call, Cindy James vanished. Cindy's car was found that same day in a neighborhood parking lot. Inside were groceries and a wrapped gift, suggesting that Cindy had her life cut off in an instant. There was blood on the driver's side door, and the items from Cindy's wallet were found under her car. 2 weeks later, the search for Cindy ended at a vacant property. The state of Cindy's body was horrifying. She had been bound, hands to feet, in a position of extreme distress. A black nylon stocking was tied so tightly around her throat that it left no doubt as to the cause of death. This looked like the final act of a relentless stalker, but official reports would eventually label Cindy James's death as a suicide, with the autopsy citing a fatal cocktail of morphine and other substances found in her system. But for those who knew the details of the scene, that verdict felt like an impossibility. As Cindy's father Otto pointed out, the math just didn't add up. After self-administering a massive overdose, Cindy would have had mere moments before losing motor control. Hardly enough time to bind herself in the complex fashion she was found in. Beyond the physical feat required to do all of this, Otto noted the eerie cleanliness of the crime scene. There were no syringes or drinking vessels nearby to explain how the drugs entered his daughter's system. To the family, this wasn't suicide. It was murder. But what really made police believe this whole situation wasn't murder, but was in fact suicide, was that despite thousands of hours of investigation and many hours of police surveillance on her home, police never found a single piece of evidence that would reveal a suspect. There were no fingerprints or DNA on the threatening notes or at the point where her phone line was cut. Cindy's ex-husband, Dr. Makepeace, was a prime suspect, but there wasn't any conclusive evidence to ever point a finger at him other than him being a disgruntled ex. And Dr. Makepeace would deny that he was Cindy's murderer up until his death in 2013. It's easy to look at what happened to Cindy and say that she was murdered. I mean, after all, why would Cindy commit all these crimes against herself? And in fact, how would Cindy even do all this to herself? And as we cover more true crime, especially crimes taking place in the early 1900s, and I actually mean the early 1900s and not Gen Z early 1900s through the 1990s, there are certain demographics that get shafted by the police during investigations. However, it is reported that over $2 million were spent trying to investigate the case of Cindy James. And let's also be honest, this isn't going to be the last time a disgruntled male ex may have murdered his former lover. In fact, the very first topic I covered on this channel, one of the theories as to who the Gruber family was an ex-male lover. Now, was Cindy dealing with mental health issues? I mean, she was committed to a local psychiatric ward due to the fear that at one point, Cindy was going to harm herself. Cindy would be evaluated for multiple personality disorder, but the doctors found she had no mental health issues and that her unusual behavior during her attacks was the result of police not believing her claims. Makes sense. Cindy was in the hospital for 10 weeks, and I'm going to kind of shift the blame back to Cindy here, because after she was discharged from the hospital, apparently she admitted to her family that she knew more than she was letting on. You see, Cindy said she believed she knew who was harassing her, and if the police weren't going to stop the harasser, she would do it herself. And allegedly, while in the psychiatric ward, Cindy did write in her diary, "They say I'm doing this to myself. I think my best option is..." I know you're probably sitting there going, you just said she was a victim, but then you said she was a suspect. You said she committed suicide, but no, she was murdered. It's weird how these two cases eerily mimic each other. And I didn't pick these two purposefully for that reason. I just picked these off a Google Doc sheet I have and said, oh, these are 2 smaller crimes that we can talk about in one episode. I didn't know they were going to parallel each other. They're both stories about either 2 young people were having a psychotic break and committed, or these were 2 people who someone intentionally murdered them. As for Lars Mittank, I tend to believe that he was having a psychotic episode through his antibiotics. People can have weird reactions to medication that they're on. This is by no means me comparing myself to Lars, but like, for example, I can't take gabapentin, which is a nerve medication to help ease pain in nerves, because it feels like someone is like trying to gouge out my eyes. So even though gabapentin and cefprozil are kind of lesser medications, I'll say they're not like super high-end drugs that you're going to easily overdose on. People can have adverse reactions to anything. And I do believe that Lars Mittank had an adverse reaction to the cefprozil. I believe that he was paranoid, and I truly believe that he thought somebody was after him. As for Cindy James, I'm going to say that she was murdered. There's just a lot with the murder scenes that points to how could someone do that? I mean, if they're saying morphine's in her system, she would not have the time to then inflict the wounds on her that was found. You know, the note through her hand and tying herself in the nylon stocking. Hi there, we have a guest. This is Levi. So, yes, I'm going to believe that Cindy James was murdered. I don't believe it was. I believe she was in a situation, as I said, the police didn't believe her. And although I believe the police did more of a job than in some true crimes that we're going to cover, I can fully believe that she, weirdly enough, was almost having a psychotic episode because no one would believe that she was being attacked, which is just as terrible. I mean, imagine somebody doing all that stuff to you, putting dead cats in your yard, and people thinking you did that to yourself. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. I would love to get your input. There's a lot of TV episodes, podcasts, news stories that go more depth into these 2 if you want to look yourself. I also link all my resources down below. Please don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this. I've been Conrad Iacobellis. I don't know what the next episode's going to be about, but I hope to see you there. Kisses, hugs, and belly rubs, everybody. And I'll see you in the next episode.